Okay. How does one know? Whatever. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what that means. Hello, can you hear me? Can anybody hear me? There's like a delay, and I don't know about the delay. Okay, cool. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Alright, I'm gonna send this out one more time for like nobody. Uh, West Virginia fossils. Except it says even fossils. Yay! Tweet. Okay. There's like such a delay between things that I apologize if things go weird, but I think it works out. I have never done this before. This is my first time live teaching. every every other time I recorded it and just put it online. So, yay! Okay, so yay lessons. Okay, so I am talking about the fossils found in West Virginia. I'm actually doing this for the Kanawha Rock and Mineral Club. I think that's what it is. Kanawha's fun. This is how you spell Kanawha. So that's how you spell Kanawha, which there's too many letters for that to be the actual word. But hey, that's how it goes. Um, so yeah, fossils of West Virginia. I am Dr. Beth, and I will be doing. That's the wrong thing. Do 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 do. All right. So, quick outline is going to be this is about me. Then it's going to be the geologic time of West Virginia. And then just kind of talk about the major fossil groups of the invertebrates and the vertebrates. Um, so, yeah, with the invertebrates, it'll be mostly just groups as a whole, whereas in the vertebrates, I'll talk a little bit more about the individual groups. So, a little bit about me. This is me. I'm cute lady. This was taken over 10 years ago. I still look very much like this. Got my bachelor's at the University of Tennessee in Martin, where I studied oncolites, associated with stromatolites, so in Mexico. So these are the stromatolites. Oncolites would have been off in the shoal areas. More biology than paleontology, but it is, stromatolites, first things ever giving us oxygen, so, it's kind of paleo. Kent State, for my master's, studied bivalves, biotic interactions associated with bivalves of the Coon Creek Formation of Tennessee. Also known as Coon Creek Strikes Back. This time it's boring. RAR. RAR is very important. And then my PhD here in West Virginia, studying crinoids from the Lake Valley Formation, which is this behind me here. And then I taught various places, did a postdoc, moved around 8 times in 16 years. So, it's academia. It sucks. But I'm not in academia anymore, and that's awesome. Geologic time scale of West Virginia. I'm going to assume that the people probably know a little bit about this, since they're all from West Virginia. But mostly the West is pretty boring, Permian, Pennsylvania. Not a lot of structure. That's kind of a lie. No, that's not really a lie. It's still relatively flat. Whereas over east, where you get the older material, you get the Appalachians, and so you get a lot of anticlines, synclines, faults, overturned beds, weirdness. It's great. And I've color-coded the geologic time scale, so when we look at the individual animals, you'll see that you'll have colors next to them, and that's just so you know where we are in time. Mostly it's the invertebrates are going to be the entire Paleozoic, and then the vertebrates will be in various times during the Paleozoic. Yep, so I'm so used to using regular PowerPoint and not how I do this. That's the wrong button. There we go. So Paleozoic is this. It started about 540 million years ago, and that's when life on Earth as we know it kind of really started. Life did start, well, multicellular life, I should say, did start right at the end of the Proterozoic, but we get a big influx of organisms during what we call the Cambrian explosion, where suddenly we have lots of animals with lots of hard parts that we recognize today. And so Paleozoic is from 542 million to about 252 million years ago, and it ends with what we call the Great Dying. So, one of the first major groups of organisms are corals. Corals are still living today. Not either of these two groups, but other groups of corals. They come in 2 flavors in the Paleozoic. They come in tabulates, so named because they have little tables associated with them, where each little table you see here is the bottom of where the animal was. So as the old animal dies, a new one puts down a flooring and grows up from there. And they just build up like that. And this is the top part of another type of coral, where this is a chain coral. This is a honeycomb coral, chain coral, where you can easily see the individual homes of all these different corals that live there. So these are tabulates. The other group are the rugose corals, also known as the horn corals. Usually we see them, or we associate them like this, where you see the name horn comes from. And then you have colonial corals. So these are solitary. You get colonial corals. This is a very important one for West Virginia, Lithostrotionella, which when it's nice and polished, it is our state gemstone. Similar to corals, we have bryozoans. Bryozoans are My cat's coming to say hello, so hopefully I'll keep her from doing things. Um, so bryozoans are similar in that they're colonial animals for the well, all bryozoans are colonial, um, whereas corals can be solitary. They form big colonies with individual openings. So here, here is you can see. I'm gonna just pick you up so you don't accidentally step on my computer. Um, Here you can see kind of individual openings. They're much smaller, and but same basic idea. Colonial organisms. They come in a variety of shapes. They had very much the same type of place in the Paleozoic world that the corals do today. So you see a lot of shapes of bryozoans that look very much like corals do today. Bryozoan is really boring. The only one that's kind of interesting is Archimedes. Archimedes is named for Archimedes screw because it looks like a screw. Usually you just find the screw part, but occasionally you get lucky and find a whole bunch more of it, and you can see where you have these big fans that come off. So it's just like a big fan of essentially this that goes out. And Archimedes is actually really, really nice because if you find them, you know exactly what time period you're in. You would be in the Mississippian, which is, I just realized I didn't put Permian on this, but which would be about right here in time. So, as I said, corals and bryozoans are very similar. They tend to both be colonial. They will grow on other organisms, but corals are much, much bigger. So here is a brachiopod that has become home for bryozoans and for corals. Now, bryozoans are very hard to see. This is just a group that's kind of growing over the top, nice little layer. Um, and probably you wouldn't know that from this picture if it wasn't layered or wasn't labeled. Whereas corals, you can easily see the individual coralites that attach to this guy. So corals are much bigger. The other big difference is corals are predators and bryozoans are suspension feeders. So corals have a harpoon that they shoot out to catch prey as it swims by and then bring it back to itself. Whereas bryozoans stick out what we call a lophophore, stick it out into the water and passively wait for material to come by so it can eat. So two very different animals that look relatively similar to one another. The big group of the Paleozoic are the brachiopods. These guys are everywhere. I like to call them the cockroaches of the Paleozoic because if you're in a Paleozoic rock that has fossils, 99.999% of the time it's going to have brachiopods in it. As you can see, they come in a wide variety of shapes, sizes as well, even though I don't have any indication as to how big these are. But this guy here, it can be as small as a eraser head, and this guy can be larger than a $50 or silver dollar. So pretty good wide range of sizes. And what's fun about these guys, they look superficially like clams, bivalves. They have that same kind of shape. They actually have two shells that connect on a hinge, but they are not related to bivalves at all. They are actually more closely related to bryozoans, because bryozoans and brachiopods both have that lophophore. So here are two of these groups doing their filter feeding, where they've stuck their lophophore out. This guy's opened his mouth to stick his lophophore out. Suspension feeding, catching food. So collectively, this is a group known as the lophophorates. So this is like a superphylum, I think. whereas Bryozoa and Brachiopoda are phylums. And if you don't remember Linnaean, it goes kingdom, which is the animal kingdom. Well, actually, it goes domain, which is Eukarya, kingdom, animal kingdom, and then the phylum would be Bryozoan or Brachiopod. Um, but you can also find some fossilized lophophores too, which is pretty cool. Um, the brachiopods used to exist everywhere that clams exist today. So, shallow water, warm water. If you were walking the beach of the ancient Paleozoic world, you wouldn't be picking up clam shells, you would be picking up bivalve shells, or bivalve shells, brachiopod shells. Um, but at the end of the Great Dying, so end of the Paleozoic, most brachiopods go extinct. Bivalves are allowed to take over their niche, and brachiopods are pretty much regulated to being in colder waters and deeper waters. And this here just shows how similar bivalves or brachiopods are, but the easy way to tell them apart is look for where the symmetry is. Bivalves have symmetry through the hinge, which just means that if you had two shells of the same animal, they would mirror each other. Whereas brachiopods are symmetrical perpendicular to the hinge. So it's a left-right symmetry. The upper valve and the lower valve do not look alike at all. So if you're fossil hunting and you question, do I have a clam or a brachiopod, that's the easiest way to tell. Lots of mollusks live in the Paleozoic rocks of the West Virginia area. Very few clams, because clams were a very small part of the ecosystem, again, until the Great Dying. Lots of different types of snails. This is just one type. You get nice curly-cued types all over the place, kind of like your classic snail kind of look that you think of. Two types of, what are these guys? Cephalopods. So squids, octopus with outer shells. This is a nautiloid, Orthoceras. I didn't do it. Very common in the Devonian, this Ordovician Devonian, this particular thing, genus, and then here's an ammonoid. That not as common. They become much more common in the Mesozoic. The stars of the Paleozoic are always the trilobites. Everybody wants the trilobites. And so here are just three of the genera that you can find in West Virginia. And I mean, trilobites are cool. They're definitely interesting. And usually, though, when you find them, you're not going to find the quote unquote actual animal. You're going to find the molt of the animal. So, because these three are all completely intact, this is probably the dead animal. Whereas often you actually find just the head piece or just the tail piece, and that's from molting. So if you are, or if you know, like insects, lobsters, crabs, there's something weird just drove by my apartment, making weird noises. Lobsters, crabs, and things, they grow until they can't fit inside their shell anymore, and then they break out of their shell and grow a new hard part. So usually you find the molts, and not the actual dead animal itself, which can be a problem when you're trying to figure out, how many trilobites lived in an area. Well, if you have a bunch of molts, you're not really sure. The other big type of arthropod that we have in our West Virginia rocks is Eurypterus, which is Silurian only. Eurypterids live throughout the entirety of the Paleozoic, but our big one, the one that's most common, is Silurian only. And Eurypterus is actually the most common of the sea scorpions that exist. And we've got more along the average size, but the largest known Eurypterid is kind of large. It's not the big, it's not, sorry, the largest known Eurypterus is kind of large. Not the largest Eurypterus, the largest, I'm getting my words all mixed up. Not the largest sea scorpion. The largest sea scorpion would be much taller than this man. So kind of glad that they don't exist anymore. It's a thing. And then, of course, the coolest of all the invertebrate organisms are the echinoderms, mostly the crinoids. Crinoids are best fossils, because that's what I study, and so I can have that opinion. Mostly, and I need to remember to put a picture of crinoid stems in this. Mostly you're just going to find the stems, or the individual bits that basically look like this here, with none of this fancy head pieces and arm pieces, because echinoderms like to break apart and disarticulate, and you need really good conditions to find whole crinoid or cystoids like this guy, whole heads like this. Blastoids are actually pretty easy to find as the actual head. They're pretty well cemented together, so these aren't too bad to find. We actually have a really cool rock outside the Mount Chateau, our building, that is just absolutely filled with crinoids. And they're all molds like this guy, but it's just absolutely filled with all of these. It's so awesome. And I mean, if I didn't know that I wanted to work here forever, coming and seeing this rock of crinoids made me know that I was going to want to work here forever. And I just started into September, so it's a pretty quick turnaround. So those are the invertebrate groups. Most people don't really care for them. They're not exciting, they're not sexy, but they give us a lot of good information. On to the vertebrates, though. Our first vertebrate is the Gruiopteron. And these guys are actually cool because they're not quite amphibians. They're before amphibians. They're in that I'm not really a fish anymore, but I'm not really an amphibian. So yeah, I just kind of think that's cool. This guy was actually found out of a quarry, so a working live quarry in Greer, West Virginia. I'm not sure where that is. And so they pulled him out and sent him off to the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, which, if you're not familiar with United States geography, is not in West Virginia. In fact, none of our really cool vertebrate specimens remained in West Virginia. They've all gone elsewhere. So it's kind of one of the things we want to try to do, is bring these things back home, if we can. Fortunately, it's like Carnegie up in Pittsburgh, so like an hour away. Cleveland's not too far. The Smithsonian's not too far. So, they're not in a whole different part of the world, but it'd be cool to have our own things. But these guys, basically giant salamanders wandering around swamps of the late Mississippian, and eating whatever they ate. Sorry, train of thought went away there. Next big thing is Euryops. Euryops is an another amphibian, a really big amphibian, one of the largest to actually exist in during the Permian during this time. Uh, Largest amphibian, one of the largest animals. This is what I'm trying to say. And the they basically were alligators, kind of the alligators of the time. And you can see their shape is very alligator-like, kind of low to the ground. They have kind of this alligator type face, eyes are on the top. So they probably had a very similar niche to that. One of the coolest amphibians is Diplocerapsis, which is this guy here. And I couldn't find a nice picture of the skeleton. So here's Diplocaulus, which is much more famous, and but it does show the shape of the skull is actually, this is actually bone. And the thought behind the shape of the skull, this weird boomerang shape, is that it probably helped with their swimming, helped them cut through the water very easily. Particularly in going up and down the water column. They figured that out through wind tunnels and, fluid effects and whatnot. We actually do have a couple of large reptiles. We have the Dimetrodon, which is very famous, probably the most famous of the large reptiles of the Permian, often mistaken for a dinosaur. Not a dinosaur. Before the dinosaurs, this is a group of, or from the group of mammal-like reptiles that they split off before. All right, so they're mammal-like reptiles in terms that their heads, their skulls are very similar to mammal skulls today. They're synapsids. It's the official term. But these guys broke off before the group that eventually turned into dinosaurs and birds and mammals. So I couldn't find for sure if we had bones or not, but we definitely have footprints. Dimetrodon Berea is the official name of it, because it was found near Berea, West Virginia. But this is like the one thing we have, the actual fossil we have in our little museum is the actual footprints. In terms of this large sail, don't really know what it was for. Maybe thermoregulation. It's a pretty good idea. Probably sexual selection. There's even an idea that there's might have been sexual dimorphism in Dimetrodons, where we have two species that are currently separate species, but they could be the same species, just the larger one being male and the smaller one being female. But stuff like that's really hard to prove in the fossil record, because you don't. It's very difficult to check out the boy bits and the girl bits. And then finally we have Edaphosaurus, very similar in look to the Dimetrodon, but these guys are much smaller. They are herbivores, whereas Dimetrodon was a carnivore. Their fin shape is different in terms of tends to be a little bit lower, but mostly the sail doesn't have, or the sail does have these little crossbars on them for some reason. Don't know why. But we definitely have found bones of this guy in West Virginia. So that's the Paleozoic. Lots of things to talk about the Paleozoic. I didn't talk about everything you could find in the Paleozoic. But, there's a lot to talk about because it's a long time. We have rocks from every age that could possibly have fossils. So, there's lots of good things to look at. Then we get into the Mesozoic. Everybody loves the Mesozoic This happens right after the Great Dying, where like 90% of all life on Earth goes extinct, and it moves through the end of the dinosaurs, where 80, 75, 80% of all things go extinct. But hey, guess what? West Virginia does not have any Mesozoic rocks, other than one area has some volcanic rocks from the Jurassic, I believe. Um, and the reason why is because here's what North America looked like during the Mesozoic. You've got two continents split by the Western Interior Seaway. You have Laramida, where things like T Rex and Triceratops, Stegosaurus, and those things lived. And then you have Appalachia, where some things lived, not a lot that we know of, because we don't have a lot of good fossil sites. And the reason is that we have this thing called preservation potential. Likelihood an organism is going to be preserved as a fossil. And you're most likely to be preserved if you have hard parts, which not hard if you have bones, which vertebrates do. But it also helps to be buried rapidly. And you don't get buried rapidly when you're on land unless you get stuck in a flood. So because of this, we have a bias in the fossil record towards marine organisms that have hard parts. And when we look at take a closer look at Appalachia, all these little dots are where fossils have been found. You get the occasional oddball, and then some of these over here are trackways. But pretty much everything found in Appalachia have been along the coastlines. So things in the center where West Virginia would be don't get those fossilized. So no dinosaurs from West Virginia, which, makes a lot of people sad. Everybody loves dinosaurs. But that doesn't mean we don't have some cool things. So we move into the Cenozoic, where we have everything after the dinosaurs. And we don't have a lot of rocks per se, but we have areas that things died in. Lots of cave systems in West Virginia, where something would die and it would be cut off from scavengers, and which is why being buried rapidly is really good, because then you get cut off from scavengers, from bacteria, things that are going to break you down. So caves are very good at this. So we've got a lot of things that come out in caves. One thing we have is Platygonus. It's a peccary. So not a pig, but a peccary. I don't really know what the difference is, but there is a difference. And these guys would have been larger than the modern peccaries. Modern peccaries, at least the ones that I've seen, are, I don't know, maybe the size of the larger end of a medium dog. So maybe like a golden retriever, maybe. So not super big. These guys would have been bigger. Most likely they would have been pack animals, gregarious, want to live in groups. Don't know that for sure, but it's not a terrible thing to think. And at our museum, we will eventually have this on display. But here is a whole skeleton of Platygonus vitis, which was found in a cave, Poor Farm Cave in Pocahontas County. So I don't know, people may know where that is. I don't know where that is, but that's where it was found. We don't currently have the skull, but we will eventually. So this is basically just the whole animal. Just that's how they found it dead. And so we're going to make him look really nice before we put him on display. Very common animals to pull out of Cenozoic rocks are mastodon and mammoth, particularly their teeth. Teeth are very hardy. So a lot of times with a lot of vertebrate animals, with a lot of mammals, and vertebrates too, because shark teeth, uh, usually you're going to find the teeth and not much else because the teeth are going to hang around. They're made of hardier stuff than bone. But we do have both mammoth and mastodons. They are very similar elephantine animals, where you have the mastodon tends to be smaller. They have a shorter, less curvier tusk, and they have teeth that are very pointy. Um, or they're, I'll say this here, I probably won't say this in the actual talk, but the scientific name for mastodon is mammoth, M-A-M-M-U-T, because the people that named them thought that their teeth looked very nipply. So mammary glands, mammoth, nipples on the mammary glands, teeth that look nipply. That's where it all comes from. Um, and they use these teeth to eat leaves and twigs. So these guys are what we would consider browsers. Whereas the mammoth, bigger, longer, curvier tusks, have a mouthful of teeth that are made for eating grass. So these are grazers. So this is how you could have two really large mammals who are going to eat a lot of material living in basically the same place because they're eating different foods. This guy's taking everything off of trees and bushes. This guy's taking everything off the ground. So it's a good way to separate off the niche of things. Um, so yeah, mammoths and mastodons. And then the big guy is our state fossil, Megalonyx jeffersoni, giant ground sloth. Um, and our giant ground sloth was the, I think, the first vertebrate fossil described in North America by one Thomas Jefferson, because he liked the science. These original bones were found in a cave in Monroe County. Again, I'm going to assume people know where that is when I give the talk. And that um, he compared it a lot to particularly the claws. He compared it to a lion. But he didn't really, like, other than giving it the name giant claw, Megalonyx, he didn't put any taxonomy to it. But when he sent Lewis and Clark out to, find the Pacific Ocean, he did tell them to look for living ones because he thought that they would still be alive. They're not. But he did note that the bones were very similar to the Megatherium, which was a ground sloth that lived in South America that had already been described. And I want to read the name of the paper he wrote because it's just such a fun name. It's A Memoir of the Discovery of Certain Bones of a Quadruped of the Clawed Kind in the Western Part of Virginia. So fun. We don't name things like that anymore. We name our papers that anymore. And then finally, kind of out of time, but we have a lot of plants. And I don't know anything about plants other than they're plants, and we have a lot of them. But because of Pennsylvanian swamps, which gave us a lot of plants, we have all sorts of coal that we dig out of the ground and burn and destroy our planet with. Yay! So that's the fossils of West Virginia. I do want to say that our little museum is getting a makeover. These are, well, not this one, but these are pictures I took on Friday as we are moving things around. We're getting a Tarbosaurus, so a little Tyrannosaurus. No, yeah, it's a Tyrannosaur relative We just haven't finished putting them together. We have a lot of new display cases for things. So, when the pandemic's over, come up and say hello. Cool. Questions? I hope you enjoyed it. That is the best place to find fossils in the Morgantown area. The best place to find fossils in the Morgantown area is, I'm not sure. We have maps that have old locations with it, um, but a lot of them are, um, what's the word? Uh, the localities are old, so things have changed either from developments or just from time. But apparently there's some area near the Dairy Queen that still has some fossils to look at. So I don't know. Maybe someday we'll go to the Dairy Queen and look for fossils. But we're not in the best area anyway, especially since like all the good places have been paved over with highways. Hey, you're coming in summer. Field trip indeed. I'll go find all the good places. Collect things for the museum. Well, thank you for thank you for coming, and we'll figure out a way to uh, uh, yes, there are good locations to find fossils. I've been to a few. Um, we're gonna look for some tomorrow. Uh, yeah, tomorrow. Tomorrow's Monday. I have to get up and be out of the house by like 5:30 in the morning. Um, but we're gonna go see if we can find somewhere that has good blastoids. But I know a couple of places like an hour away that have some pretty good fossils you can collect. Um, but yay! I like fossils. Thanks for coming. I will answer more questions if you have them. Yay! Thank you for coming, Cat. Thank you for waking up early. Oh, my battery is low. Okay, cool. Thanks. Alright, well, since my battery on my laptop's gonna die, I probably need to unplug, or not unplug, but plug in. Um, so again, thanks. And hey, if you want me to talk about something else sometime, shoot me a holler. I'll talk about crinoids. Have a great day, guys. I will tweet how well my talk on to the rock and mineral group went later. So I'm going to stop streaming. Bye.